Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com is brought to you by BASF.
Hey, Kara Oosterhuis here with RealAgriculture.com. I am here today with another Pulse School episode, and I have here with me Sarah Anderson, who is the agronomy manager with Saskatchewan Pulse Growers. How's it going today?
Good, thanks. How are you?
Good. So we are here today. It has been no doubt a dry year across the prairies, and one of the considerations now that the growing season's over, is next year and herbicide carryover. Do you want to talk a bit about what producers need to be looking out for when it comes to carryover?
Yeah, I think producers really need to, first be aware that the 2021 growing season was renowned for its drought characteristics. And so that is going to put a little bit more pressure on herbicide carryover in general. So growers should look to understanding what active ingredients were applied and what crops may be sensitive to carryover. So if they're going to plant back into those fields the following year, what particular crops may have some issues or be more prone to injury because of that. So that could come from referring to the label. This year we maybe also have some instances where crops that normally would still retain safe recrop back on that label. There may be some additional warnings or considerations that manufacturers might want you to keep an eye out for. So checking with the manufacturers is a good rule as well.
So when it comes to looking at making our plans for next year, why are pulse crops especially susceptible to herbicide carryover? Why do we really need to be watching out for them?
Yeah, I think they can be fairly sensitive to herbicide carryover in general. Again, that's going to depend on what herbicides we're considering. So it's not a blanket statement, and pulses are always sensitive to what was applied the season before. But I think there is a good case to be made that pulses can be sensitive to a wide variety of active ingredients across different groups. So we have to keep more than just one herbicide group on our radar.
Now, when obviously it's different, like you said, we can't blanket statement them, but how long can some of these herbicides actually stay in your soil? How many years back do you have to be paying attention?
Yeah, again, depends on the persistence of the specific active ingredient within that herbicide product. So some active ingredients are broken down fairly quickly, while others may persist for a longer period of time under relatively the same soil conditions. Relative speed at which a soil residual herbicide is broken down will also depend, largely on the soil conditions themselves. And that's because microbial degradation is one of the major pathways for herbicide breakdown. And microbial activity, of course, is higher when soils are relatively warm or relatively moist. So herbicide breakdown is going to, generally happen a little bit faster under those circumstances. Soil properties as well, such as soil pH and soil organic matter, may influence how long a certain active ingredient resides in the soil. So it's not, a black and white, how long, this number of months. We have guidelines, of course, but conditions are really going to influence how long back we need to go.
So now, if producers are in, of course, we're getting some moisture in some areas. However, it's been a fairly open fall in most of the prairies. How does that impact, like you said, residue and how it can carry over to next year?
Yeah, so it's, those later rains that we were maybe getting sort of during harvest timing, I would say is generally a good thing from a herbicide carryover standpoint. That said, it might not be enough to overcome the drought conditions of sort of the in-season growing conditions. So generally we look at rainfall accumulation between June 1st and August 31st. And that's, really for a few different reasons, but one of the factors is how warm those soils are. So as we get into the shoulder parts of the season, into the fall, or even right now, the expectation is that soil temperature has dropped, and therefore microbial degradation, even if the soils are receiving moisture at this point, they may be quite slow, right? As our soils are dropping below 10 degrees, it's just not enough warmth to sustain high levels of microbial activity. So, moisture in general is going to help, but it's maybe a little bit more minimal as we get later into the season. I think we also have to be aware that some of those, rainfalls that did happen a little bit later, especially if it was one rainfall and that soil had been dry for a very long period of time, often then that moisture is very quickly moving down into lower layers of the soil. And so that top surface layer where lots of the herbicide degradation is happening kind of dries out again really quickly. So obviously not going to turn away any moisture avoidance events as they happen later, but I think we should really be focused on that June 1st to August 31st timeframe.
So how can we actually be testing for herbicide carryover? What's that process look like?
Yeah, so this is actually a really tricky one. So we do have soil testing capability to look for chemical residues through chemical extractions in the soil. The sort of flip side of that is it's really difficult to generate a meaningful recommendation. Our lab testing diagnostic ability is quite good to be able to pick up these residues at even low amounts. But then understanding, is that herbicide active going to be biologically available to the plant, and for how long and to what extent, is much more difficult. So often I think that we're relying on understanding the conditions that we applied the herbicide under, and the following environmental conditions. Was there enough, wet and warm to sort of break that herbicide down for good microbial activity, and really adjusting our rotations based on that and manufacturer recommendations more than relying on a soil extraction soil test. That said, having an understanding of your soil properties in general might help you to evaluate different levels of risk between your fields. Some of those soil characteristics we talked about earlier, organic matter, soil texture, pH, those things will all kind of influence how that herbicide breaks down and how it re-releases back to the plant.
And I guess probably just furthers the importance of record keeping when it comes to these types of things.
Absolutely. It's hard to build a rotation based on risk of herbicide carryover if we don't have a good collection of what herbicides were applied where. So yes, echo that wholeheartedly. Record keeping is huge.
Okay. Anything else you would like to, any messages you'd like to send to producers when it comes to herbicide carryover and what we should really be looking out for in 2022?
Yeah, I think the standard of just the risk for herbicide carryover in general in the 2022 growing season is, quite a real concern across a wide amount of acres. So again, that's going to be different on every field. We did have localized areas that maybe aren't at as big a risk. So really understanding where your farm sits sort of into the big picture is going to be a key consideration. I guess I would also say, of course, we've been talking about rotation in terms of herbicide carryover, but really taking a look at what implications changing these crop plans and crop choices has on your overall rotation. You want to evaluate the least amount of risk to your farm in general. And, sometimes we're presented with other herbicide, or other rotational risk rather, as a result of the herbicide carryover by narrowing rotation length, or perhaps, thinking that we need to manage a crop using another residual herbicide of the same class that we're battling the herbicide carryover. So imidazoline, for example, if a clearfield crop was grown last year, we're doing a replant back into pulses this year. I think some good advice would be to really think about, do we need to manage that crop under the clearfield system, or should we be thinking about ways that we can manage weed control conventionally just to avoid another round of the same herbicide on that same piece of land.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, you bet.